All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode 426 for the 1st of March. Ramon Terrell, thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us right away, even before we got started. Glad to have you here. And boy, I'm sorry that I missed last week. There was not a lot of news, but some big news, right? And Talmaster and Game Logic held it down nicely. Good analysis, and I appreciate always the insight and perspective that we try to bring here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast, because that is what we try to do every week. We are here on a Sunday evening to talk about the week's news, what we've been playing, some of the big releases, or other things that have grabbed our attention over the course of this week. I am your host tonight, DBQ Hams. And yes, while I was gone last week, I was not gone in spirit, as I listened afterward and nodded along or did a number of corrections, mainly to Tao, but he's not here, so I can't even give him a hard time about it. But that is okay, because joining me tonight is Game Logic. Game, how are you tonight?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I hear you guys are losing a couple players on the Vikings. A couple people who, if they don't get a trade made in the next week, I think your secondary running back, and I forget what position the guy's name is. Hargrove.
Yes, I did see that the former Packer running back and now Viking running back Aaron Jones looks to be being released. Yes, this is in the NFL. This is coming close. The NFL Combine was this past weekend. It is the wonderful. Should I say that sarcastically, just in case you're not aware, the meat market that is the NFL Combine in terms of evaluating players, football players, American football players on a series of skills, and it's also becoming the first of the league year, which means salary caps hit. So, but there's plenty of other stuff. Spring leagues in baseball have started down in Arizona and in Florida, so that's going on. We've got plenty of soccer and football and basketball, even if at least men's basketball. We get soon into college basketball, since we are now in March and March Madness. But while we talk plenty about, go ahead.
Most importantly, Formula One season starts next weekend.
Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Good call. As we talk plenty about sports video games, this is a video game podcast, but yes, sports definitely make our way into it. Game Logic, as we take this little aside here, as you mentioned Formula One, one of the things, as we do at the end of every show, we kind of talk about some of the releases coming up this week. One of the releases that I saw this week is iRacing Arcade. Have you seen anything about that?
No, I have not been so iRacing, in my mind, iRacing, as far as a digital storefront is concerned, is most closely associated with Steam. That's where I see it come across my windshield, and I have not, because of the games that I've been playing, I just haven't been camped out on Steam, hawking things like I might usually be doing. So no, I wasn't aware of it at all.
All right. Well, talking about the games that you've been playing, let's start with the first one, which you've been talking about for a while here, which is Legend of Heroes, Trails Beyond the Horizon. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you finished a JRPG.
I did. I rolled credits on Legend of Heroes, Trails Beyond the Horizon earlier in the week, and that's really kind of the only reason I added it here. I'd probably normally, because I think I finished it on maybe Monday night. But I did want to kind of just go over a summary of my notes from the experience. So one of the things I loved about the game was the animations. And I think that's kind of true of a lot of turn-based JRPGs. It's they make a lot of their initial salt, in your first couple of hours in the game on the strength of the animations. And lots of the shops that are doing these, they are experts at their craft. I mean, the state of the art of these animations are just great. The S breaks in the game are just, I mean, they are laugh inducing. You just love to hear them all over again. There's only one that I didn't really like. There was kind of I would call her a tier 2 character called Nadia. She and this character named Swin are boyfriend and girlfriend, and she has this really, in my mind, very horrible S-break animation where she like she conjures like a giant teddy bear, and then is like sitting on the back of the teddy bear's head, and then she sends forth this army of small teddy bears, and they like go out, grab the end, like swarm underneath the enemy and like raise him up, kind of like a slam dance, and then carry him back to her, and then she takes the big teddy bear and jumps off of him, and he topples over and then lands on the enemy, and then she like hits like a detonator or something, or snaps her fingers or something, and then like the giant teddy bear like blows up like a nuke. So I was like, okay, I don't need that particular animation. That's not one of my favorite. The other ones are very neat. In close conjunction with the animations, the shouts in the game are just really great. Again, there are lots that are very laugh inducing. Some of the smaller shouts, like when you go into command battle, which is the turn-based mode of battle, your holocrons are constantly constantly chattering to the point of them being annoying. But later on in the game, I finally figure out, and you can figure out like how to turn those off. It only has two settings. It's either default or off. So you can turn them off, and then there's less chatter, and you can even like play with it so that like you turn some of them off, but not all of them. So you wind up getting like 50% of the overall like holocron chatter. But like I said, lots of them are very laugh-inducing. There's a character in the game named Rufus, and one of his one S break really is he goes into this duel mode, and there's this whole like animation sequence of him taking off his sunglasses and challenging the person to a duel and whatever. But he's on this throne when this animation starts, and so he gets up off his throne and picks up his giant sword, and one of the characters who's a younger female says things like, teach him a lesson, Rufus, so there's little things like that really make the game kind of charming.
I just want to call out and stop for a moment, take a deep breath. And for listeners who have been around for a number of years here on this podcast, to see Game Logic talk about the summons and the animations and the character, not even character development, but the character panache of a JRPG, right? Like, and do so with a little bit of a smile and a little bit of laughter and enjoy it. Says, it says a lot, right? Like the benefit of doing this over the years is that we see our tastes expand, contract, shift, and so the fact that you're enjoying and have enjoyed a Trails game is great in terms of just the breadth and scope of what we get a chance to talk about here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Finale, Endgame, is like an entire chapter of the thing itself, and it just really overstated its welcome. The final fight goes through like 4 different phases, maybe 5. There's a recurring theme in the game that the whole thing that the game is supposed to be wrapped around is this notion that one of the nations is about to will be the first in this fantasy world to achieve space travel. And so it's all about this countdown to this rocket launch. That's what the whole game timeline and chronology are oriented around. The game takes place across the span of 3 days. And, as each chapter starts, it's kind of like an episode of 24. Like as each chapter starts, you get like a date, a number of days or hours countdown to the rocket launch, and the time, right? Like I said, just like an episode of like 24. But quite honestly, like that rocket launch is like in the background. It really doesn't mean anything, like in the context of the game. And so in the finale, there's a segment of the finale that kind of rears itself again, and it sucks up like a significant amount of time, and the game mechanics are completely different from anything that you've had in the game. And obviously at this point in the game, you're kind of like, okay, now I just want to get done with this. So that's a problem. And then, like I mentioned before, there's kind of a bathtubing effect that happens with boss battles, where if I put it on like a straight line, right, you kind of you're even with the boss, you guys are trading blows. And then you kind of you hit an up part of the curve where you're kind of beating the boss, and then all of a sudden, I mean, and a cheesy part of the boss fights that I can't stand is the way they equalize you with the boss is they allow the boss to make like 6 attacks in a row, and it gets really obnoxious. And the real problem it really grates with me is that what it winds up doing is you're sitting there for 2 or 3 minutes at a time, just with the controller in your hand, just watching these boss animations attacking you taking damage, and you not being able to do, and you're just sitting there idle, and like, and you're cursing the screen. You're like, come on,
And there's not a skip for those like spell animations and things, are there?
You can, but the problem, the reason I never skipped them was because like I didn't know if it would be apparent. So first of all, you're watching these so that you understand, like, first of all, how frequently they're doing certain types of attacks when they're hitting their S breaks, and then how much damage they're doing. And my fear was if I skip the animation, I was like, I don't know if it's going to like skip the damage readout, so I can tell what's going on.
That makes a huge difference. Yeah. Yep.
So, so that was a bit of a thing. Dungeon crawls, as I mentioned, in an episode that I was on with you before, they felt very samey, but about halfway through the game, like that started changing. The level design started becoming a little more unique. So maybe the first part of the game, like they were just kind of using templates, and then, it kind of expanded beyond that. There's a hacking mini game in the game, which I can't stand. But the conventional wisdom, all the tips and tricks articles out there said, don't skip the hacking game. So I didn't skip any of the hacks. But like as they got more and more difficult, particularly as you enter end game, and I did every hack that I came across, they were particularly annoying. I kind of mentioned the amount of like the landscape that's kind of throwaway content, but in addition to that, it has this thing. It's constructed around this notion of 3 storylines, and so your main storyline is you're with the Arkwright detective agency or whatever. You get 24 characters throughout the length of this game. Then there's a second squad led by Reen, who is his shtick was he was like an instructor at one of the military academies for like one of the other nations in the game, and then he has a crew. And then you have a character named Kevin, who is like a religious like warrior priest, and he has a crew. And quite honestly, I felt like in the amount of time that I got to spend with Kevin, I felt like Kevin was like one of the more powerful characters, but you're really with the Arkwright guys for a large part of the game, and into the end game, that's all you have access to. You don't have access to Reen and Kevin. So what you wind up doing is you wind up spending a ton of time leveling Reen and Kevin in their squads, and then not having access to them. So that part was a little kind of frustrating. And then there's also one character that feels like she's very principled to the game, but there's some things that happen with her, and she's actually starts off like as one of the more powerful characters in the game, and then there are some things that happen in the game where you don't have access to her. So by the end game, she's not one of your most leveled characters, and so it just kind of feels like there were some missed opportunities there. But overall, it was a great game. I think I finished off at I can't remember. I think maybe 96 hours. I didn't watch my like end metrics, so I don't remember how many SP I had, which kind of determines like how much the content you got through, and it gives you a grade score. I'm pretty sure it's an A. I just need to go back to the game and open up my save file just to check it out. But yeah, but I had my suspicion was I did like 70% of the side missions, 90% of the Grim Garden, which is this supposedly virtual reality place that's like the grind part of the game. I did, and it's divided into 9 domains, 9 subdomains. I did 8 of the 9. You finally get access to the 9th one when you were in the finale, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Like while I'm trying to finish the game up. And then there's these things called connections, which are like your relationship building. So I probably did, and they when you do them, they give you buffs, they give you bonuses for attacks. They help kick off like blitz attacks, which are these big kind of bombastic team ups, and then like your regular team ups, which are these things called I think SLCMs. So I probably did about 40% of those, but yeah, I had a good time. Took me probably about a month, so that wasn't great, but but that one's behind me, and I'm moving on to other stuff.
Nice. Yeah, we don't always get a chance to see things through based on the nature of the conversation. Um, so Trails Beyond Horizon, which is part of the Tales larger series. So after finishing this, does this make you want to go back and like this game as Trails Beyond Through Daybreak is it's a sequel to a different Trails game. Does it make you want to go back to some of the Trails or just be interested in what comes next within this iteration of Legend of Heroes?
So this wraps up the kind of mini trilogy. Like this is kind of like a side branch of the main thing.
Okay.
It's the 13th overall Trails game, and it's its own little subset trilogy. And this wraps up that subset trilogy. So what comes after this, I'm not absolutely certain. I have Trails. I think it's Trails Beyond Daybreak. I think, and I don't have Trails Beyond Daybreak too. If I go back to them, it would just be to kind of pick at it. It won't be to like sit down and do like a full run.
Sure.
Going backwards to and then on top of that, spending that much amount of time, I can't see making that investment.
That makes sense. Nice. Well, I also finished off a JRPG this week. It was Final Fantasy: The Pixel Remaster. So I'm not going to talk about it because it's a 1980s game. But it was the first time that I had finished it since playing it originally on the NES. But most of the time, one of the games that I didn't get a chance to talk about last week, but I've been playing it throughout the course of the last 2 weeks since it came out, is rooted in the 1990s, and that is Star Trek Voyager Across the Unknown. So this is basically a resource management and strategy game around Star Trek Voyager, basically retracing the beats of the 7 seasons of the series. It starts off, like I talked about a little bit with the demo that I played, starts right off with the pilot episode as you're going and you're chasing down the Maquis, and a wave sends you across the Delta Quadrant, light years away from where you were. And so that first kind of storyline is definitely hits within and it doesn't go episode by episode. It hits some of the bigger beats within it, which is also kind of why I'm taking it kind of slow, because after I play a few storylines, I try to go back and watch the original episodes to see what happened and what the comparisons are. And this is very much a management game and a choose your own adventure. There's a little bit of ship combat. Ship combat is you play as Captain Janeway, and so you're not flying the ship. You are giving orders to your ensign, and you can in the ship combat, which is not a major part, but it occurs, right? You get into battles, you get into incursions. When those happen, you can target certain parts of the ship that you're attacking, or certain ships to attack when you have multiple ships. So do you want to hit their warp core? Do you want to hit their shields? Do you want to hit their engines? And then you can bring in 3 characters into that, and those characters come along with some special abilities. So your pilot has the ability to do evasive maneuvers, and your security officer Tuvok has the ability to do double phasers. And so you're kind of going through some of those things. You get, not only do you work with, it's all the different characters from whether it's Tuvok and Harry Kim and Tom Paris, the pilot, or you bring in the Chakotay and B'Elanna Torres as the half Vulcan, and Neelix comes along as a character that gets introduced in that series in the first episode, and they all have skill points. Basically, they all have traits, and whether that's, are they good at negotiations or science or engineering or a military action or aggressiveness, right? And so when you send down an away team, you choose 2 to 3 people, and then it goes into almost like it's text based with a static image on the screen, and you get some text of the situation, and then usually you have 3 choices, and those choices have a skill check of, like, if you want to try to negotiate your way out, you have a skill check of a number that you want to try to get above to increase the percentage that this will be successful. And so you choose which people from your away team will be engaged in that activity. But if you use them, then for the next kind of decision point, they're fatigued. So they have a penalty in terms of their stats. And so if you're looking to kind of balance your reactions. You can't always go in constantly diplomatic or constantly aggressive, because unless you've stacked and built your away team that way. And as they are successful at the end of every away mission, they'll level up, or they'll gain experience points to level up, which increases their stats. Then you get into kind of the resource management aspect, where your ship needs fuel, it needs resources to rebuild different rooms. The ship layout is very much like a Fallout shelter type of layout, where you've got all your different, that part fits very much with the developers' kind of history in mobile. And in terms of kind of resource management, as you need to get life support to a deck to be able to, build additional components on it, or you need to clean out the debris from a damaged room in order to build something else. And then building something requires crews. Depending on how many crews you have, you can have multiple projects going. If you're building, if you have multiple engineering rooms, then you have multiple crews that can go out. And it takes a number of cycles. And as you're going out to explore the system that you're in, you can scan those different planets or different nodes on the map, which sometimes are debris fields or arrays, and they often are they going to give you kind of your fuel resource, or there's a couple different resources that you are mining, basically, or harvesting. And depending on what you go to, it's how far away it is, it takes a number of cycles. And those cycles you're balancing with your morale, that if morale gets too low, you get a revolt. If you don't have enough energy or resources for food, that drops the morale. So there's this balance within here in terms of going out. You also have a hard cap in terms of the number of resources that you can store. And so you can build additional cargo bays to store more resources. So it's a lot of this kind of resource management, along with kind of going through and progressing the story. And so you can't always rush through the story beats, that they take a few cycles to develop. And so while you're waiting for a story beat, you're going out to harvest resources, or you're upgrading parts of your ship. And so there's this back and forth piece. I'm playing it on the Nintendo Switch. When I played the demo, I played it on PC, ran great on PC. The mouse interface is basically what you have on console as well, is that you have, basically a cursor that you're moving around to select things. The text is pretty small when I'm playing it on handheld on the Switch 2, but on a TV, nice and easy to navigate. But there's a lot of resources and a lot of menus to kind of keep track of. But it starts to, you kind of, like anything, once you start learning the rhythm of it, it's not too difficult to manage. But it's also, because of that push pull and those resource caps and the cycles, you can't do everything. You can't, build everything out all at once. You can't, there's always going to be some trade-offs, and so you're kind of balancing some of those. We got a Baby Boy and a Nate in the chat. Thanks for coming in, gentlemen. It's great to have you. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I'm a Star Trek fan, so it's easy to get into it. I'm also somebody who, one of the things I'm finding that this compares to is Sid Meier's Pirates, right? Where it's not an action game. Yes, there are some action sequences, but they're kind of mini games. But it's also a lot of resource management as you're going out and attacking a ship, or trying to find buried treasure on different parts of land. And there's balances there in terms of the amount of food and gunpowder and all those other pieces. And so it definitely fits into that. It's not a hard, it's not a 4X strategy game. It's not a Civilization type of strategy game. It's pretty accessible in terms of a strategy game. And if you have any kind of Star Trek awareness or vocabulary, it also makes it pretty easy to understand why you're building the types of rooms you need. And then there's, even once you've built a room, like an engineering room, there's individual upgrades and a skill tree basically within those that allow you to kind of level up those so that they produce more resources or require fewer resources. So there's a lot within it, but I'm enjoying it. It's out on all consoles, or at Nintendo Switch 2, Xbox and PlayStation, and on PC, and it is $40.
And so, why did you decide to go Switch 2 on this one? You just wanted it in portable format?
I wanted it in portable format. I could have certainly done it on PC, as well, with the Steam Deck and there. In part, I did it because I had some extra Switch credit, eShop credit, that knocked a few more dollars off it to bring it down. But in part because I wanted the ability to play it in front of a TV, and actually the ability to play it like I did last night. Played for an hour or so, and then dropped out and popped up an episode of Voyager to watch. So it allowed kind of this back and forth that I'm playing with it.
I had an order that I wanted to ask you these things in, and I just forgot it. So I know you're a Star Trek fan, and I know that but just so we don't get a bunch of flack from Swiss in the Discord, when you were talking about B'Elanna Torres, you said she was half Vulcan. Of course, B'Elanna is half Klingon.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
So I hear,
yes, Tuvok is our Vulcan. B'Elanna is our Klingon. Yes, thank you.
So I hear elements of like different pieces of games that I like in this. And I think I asked you when you played, I think when we first talked about this, or maybe you played the demo or something. You did not play the alters, correct?
No, I did not.
Okay. So I hear bits and pieces of XCOM in this, both in terms of the base building, but also when you talk about like how each of your crew members has skill points, and you spend those, and you can choose like different skills that they get. I also hear elements of Rainbow Six in this, for people way back in the day who, like, as you would pick members of your squad to take out on missions, your members would get injured, but they would also get tired, so that they wouldn't be available like for the next. So it kind of forced you to kind of circulate and utilize the whole roster. And so I kind of like that. It keeps you from like camping out and just spamming like the same characters over and over again. So
yeah, there's definitely some incentive to modify your away teams.
It's a little disappointing that that like ship combat isn't as big a part of it that as I was hoping it would be. But that's probably also kind of understood, and I think they did a good job, I think, advertising that wasn't going to be the case. But yeah, it sounds good. I guess this game is probably like 15 to 20ish hours, depending on how much of the content you want to go through. So I'm sure you'll be bringing this back to talk about it one more time, at least.
Yeah, that's what I've seen. It's about 15, 20, depending on how long you take kind of going through some of your menus. It's also one where it encourages multiple playthroughs because you have decision points where you can, make a decision that either lines up with the show or it goes in a different direction. And there's not save scumming in this. Like you can, the developers have even said, like, if you each sector, the resources that are there are procedurally generated, and so you may end up in a spot where, they've even said that reloading a sector and restarting from a sector is totally a viable strategy, because you may not, because you need a certain amount of dilithium to keep going. You may need to re-roll basically in order to get enough planets to do that. So it's a very slow-paced game. There's not much going on in terms of atmosphere. There's not a whole lot of music that happens. You're in menus a lot, and there's not a whole lot of, there's sound effects, but there's not a lot of score. They have the Voyager theme that they've licensed. They have voiceover by the actors that play Tuvok and Tom Paris. But they are kind of at the beginning of each sector, that they're kind of, and you think of a sector like a story chapter. So, it's not, everything else is you're reading text on a screen. And so it's not a game that is super resource intensive in terms of running through. So not a whole lot of bells and whistles, but you kind of have to, like, if you enjoy a strategy game, you're not necessarily there for the atmosphere, right? You're not getting the big summons and S attacks like you were just describing with Legend of Heroes. It's very muted in that way, but also Star Trek itself, at least kind of 90s Star Trek, is not big over the top action in the same way as like the Kelvin universe would be. So, Hero Down Under, glad to have you here. Any other questions, Game Logic?
Yep, no, not right now.
All right. So, like a good RPG, we had a lot of exposition before we got into the meat of it. So, the big release this week is Resident Evil Requiem, Resident Evil 9, and Game Logic, you picked it up on PC.
Yeah, I did, and it's interesting that you just briefed out a game that is not resource intensive. So let's turn the screw and talk about a game that is very resource intensive. And tonight actually will be more of a technical debrief and not as much of a content debrief, because I'm not that far into the game. I spent a lot of my first few hours with it setting up testing rigs and test harnesses to try and capture what exactly was going on with performance before, because then I want to be able to just play the game.
So is this part of the reason why you chose to play it on PC versus picking it up on PlayStation, where you have a PlayStation Pro?
No, actually, and part of my thing is just to try and distribute games around different systems. So, I have content right everywhere, and I'm not locked in, so that if I ever need to go scorched earth on Steam again, I can, so to speak. I was actually principally considering picking this up on either Xbox or PC, and then I decided on PC. But no, testing was not a driver of that. It was more just like, since I got it on PC, I was like, okay, well, now I'm finally gonna do this testing that I've been saying forever that I was going to do. And so I started going down this path last year because when Doom: The Dark Ages came out, Will Smith over at PC World did a video and an article about how to test for micro stutter and frame pacing, which was kind of a step up from what I normally do, which is just running MSI Afterburner and looking at frame rate. And I thought it was very interesting, and particularly in this day and time, because frame pacing and stutter, micro stutter, have really kind of become the telltale and the bellwether of whether or not a game is performant. There are games that will have high frame rates, but that will still feel bad. And part of what's behind that is the whole science behind frame generation time and frame pacing and stutter. So the first test that I ran was so this is Resident Evil Requiem at 4K with path tracing on. And this is frame times, frames per second metrics, and stuttering analysis. So if you look at this, kind of what you're looking for in frame pacing is you want the greatest amount of consistency and the least amount of variance as possible. Now, when Will Smith does these, he plays the game in a certain specific way, and he tries to avoid like opening menus and things like that, because then you will get like these wild swings of variance, which are these spikes that you see here. When you talk about Resident Evil, you're also talking about a thing where you come across documents and like open files and go into your inventory. And so, at that point in time, like, frame rates may bottom out, or you may get a huge spike. So what you really want to look at is the moving average here. And you can see that this is a pretty tight distribution of frame generation time. The average, I think I'll show it on another chart, is about 16.3 milliseconds. And what you really want is a frame generation time that is sub 16.67 or so milliseconds. Is typically kind of where a game kind of feels good, and above that you can start seeing where a game like doesn't feel as well, because you're getting taking a long time to generate the frames, and then obviously if you also have variance there, that will be a problem. So this is a pretty even distribution. When Will Smith ran his tests, I did check my homework. Actually, I needed to check my homework because at one point, because I did the first test runs with frame generation on, and when you have frame generation on, it tends to kind of flummox these test harnesses, and so you will see things. And he mentioned it in his video, and that's exactly what I saw. I saw some frame generation times of like 0 milliseconds, and I was like, okay, I expected my rig to be fast, but not that fast. So So it turns out that frame generation is the thing that causes the problem. So you turn that off. And when I play the game, I will turn it back on. But he was working with a pre-release build of Resident Evil, and when NVIDIA gave him the code for that pre-release build, they did not have updated drivers that had been optimized for the game. So his frame generation times were up above like 30 milliseconds. And they were smooth. It wasn't wild swings and variance. His distribution pattern was about the same as mine, but his frame generation times were taking almost twice as long. Now he was still getting good frame rates on a 5090, above 60 frames per second. Here, my average on a 5080 is about 61.4 frames per second. Now, that again, that's with path tracing on, right? So this is max out to the nines, all the bells and whistles, everything turned on, and I'm getting above 60 frames per second at 4K. And on top of that, the frame time generation and frame pacing is really good. So, if you had any fears about getting in the waters in this game because of things that we've seen with RE engine in games that are not Resident Evil, the water seems pretty safe.
Monster Hunter Wilds was definitely
Yes.
on PC, struggled in some of these spaces. Yep.
Yeah. And then you can see the stutter analysis here. The frame, I took 2-minute test run capture runs, no stutter. Now again, this is early testing at the very beginning of the game. I have heard back from some people who said that they're 10 hours in and they're starting to see, they've hit sections that where they see stutter. Hey, what's up? It's just Henry and Ghostface Killer. Thanks so much, guys, for coming through the chat. And so yes, you run early testing, like I mentioned Baldur's Gate 3, which seemed to be like a really great performant game. And then in Act 3, there was something that happened and like people would see their performance tank on the game. We had Avatar Frontiers of Pandora that came out of the gate really great, like really high praise for its performance. But then some patch or something was released later that just totally tanked the performance of that game for a very long time. I think maybe until the DLC came out. So this is still with path tracing on, and this is going to give you a chance to look at the frames per second chart and then the frame generation metrics. And this is where I said, the average frame generation time is 16.3 seconds. And then here's, my average frame showing coming in at 61.4. So get what when I had path tracing on, what the 1% lows were. 1% lows were 50 frames per second. So this to me is not optimal. I typically fine on the average frame per second. I typically don't like dips where my 1% lows get down to the 50, so I'm probably not going to play with path tracing on. I personally actually think from what I saw of it last night, and again, I didn't go too deeply into the game, I actually felt like what I saw, the game looked better to me with just ray tracing. And this is the frame time distribution where you can see the largest area underneath the curve is, in this area where frame generation time is taking, 14 to 19 milliseconds. Very, 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 very rarely going beyond that. Let's take a quick look at, now this is with ray tracing and ray tracing high. So in other words, path tracing turned off. And this is the frame time generation metrics, and the stuttering analysis, again, still no stutter. Frames per second here. Wait, no, I'm sorry. This is the frame time generation metric. So again, here now I'm averaging 9.8 milliseconds to generate a frame with just ray tracing on and not path tracing. A little more variance, but I think at this part of the game, I was specifically doing some things that, they're not just straight ahead gameplay, but opening a lot of menus and seeing a lot of files and stuff. So again, I would look at the average mean, which is still pretty smooth. Frames per second with just ray tracing is I was hitting an average of over 100 frames per second, so 102 frames per second. So that is probably where I will play. You don't really need, so I don't need 100 frames per second in Resident Evil. But what I didn't like with the path tracing is where I saw the 1% lows dipping down to 50. So here the 1% lows are dipping down to 80, and I'm fine with that. And then the frame time distribution, just again, overall coming in, the big surface areas where it's here between, a little over 9 up to 10.5, and very rarely going beyond that. When I look at the two runs, and I think up top here is with ray tracing on, you can see that very often, the variance, right? So from frame to frame, the time between, between generating one frame and then generating the next frame, that variance is less than, under 2 milliseconds, for the vast majority of the time. Maybe a third of the time it's less than 4 milliseconds, and then, some very small percentages where it gets above that. With path tracing on, most of your time is in this band of, less than 4 milliseconds variance. So not quite as smooth with path tracing on. And then this is a NVIDIA frame view over a 2-minute run, which again just shows you that the mean time to present, which are milliseconds time to present, which is frame generation time. You can see that it's a very, very, very small variance, right, over that run.
Big spike there. Like, yeah, that's a very small. I mean, it's a pretty straight line, except for that spike.
I think that was like, again, it's either at a point where I opened up a menu or like open up a file, because like there's like case files and things that you find, or like a photo or a magazine on the floor.
Sure. Yep. And you pick it up, analyze it, read it. Yep.
Yeah. So that was an outlier. So again, my setup in running this, I was running my system with a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D processor, 64 gigabytes of RAM, and an RTX 5080. I was playing at 4K. Like I said, ray tracing high. Then the other run was with path tracing on. It has a hair strand option, which I had turned on. Just want to call out anything else major. Chromatic aberration on, anisotropic filtering at max. So these runs, I was using DLSS. I was using it in balance mode. Like I said, I had frame generation off. I did have NVIDIA Reflex low latency on. And then, when you turn on path tracing and ray tracing, obviously your spatial reflections or something like that automatically flips on. Ambient occlusion high. So again, all the bells and whistles turned on. So game seems to be pretty performant. I have seen some chatter of people complaining, saying they've had problems with drivers. I know I had one mutual who did run into like a configuration problem, not being able to set it at the resolution he wanted. He was on a Radeon card. I have seen some people on NVIDIA cards, mention some chatter about having to roll back drivers or something. I think those are outliers. I don't think that's the norm. Like I said, I've done testing. Will Smith at PC World has done testing, and both of us came up with pretty much the same results. So I think the water's pretty safe. And when I come back and talk about this game,
performance. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Pretty good performance. Yeah.
Yep.
Really stable.
So and then of course, when I come back and talk about this next time, I'll dig into the content side more.
Yeah. So I know that you and I both played Resident Evil 7. Did you play Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 8?
I did not play Village, no.
Okay. Well, I'll be curious to see, as we talk about this next week with a little more of the gameplay and the story aspects of it. So, all right. Well, let's move from our main games into our news stories, and let's stay thematically with Resident Evil. Game Logic, you got 2 stories here related to Resident Evil, so let's hit them both.
Yeah, so this first news story, I guess it would help if I brought it up on screen. Yes, okay. First news story over at The Gamer by George Foster. The PS5 Pro is sold out on PlayStation Store, and it's surely because of Resident Evil Requiem. The PS5 Pro has sold out on the official PlayStation Store, and it's almost definitely because of all the rave reviews Resident Evil Requiem has been getting on the console. Ever since the PS5 Pro was first announced, PlayStation has really struggled to justify its incredibly expensive existence. Sure, you can play some older games with both 60 frames per second and ray tracing in 4K, but the improvements really aren't that noticeable enough to be worth paying nearly twice the cost of a base PS5. In the year and a bit since the PS5 Pro release, there have only been a handful of games such as Assassin's Creed Shadows and Spider-Man 2 that feel like they tangibly benefit from the Pro. The short list got a noticeable new entry this week thanks to the release of Resident Evil Requiem, which is apparently the best way to play the game on consoles. Now, of course, one of the things that has arrived, as far as I understand, I've only seen these headlines. I personally haven't played this game on my PS5 Pro, but my understanding is that there was an update to PSSR, which is their upscaling technology. That is their alternative to FSR. I believe that the update got delivered with that, which is part of the secret sauce that's behind why people are getting such good image quality.
Yeah, that was a system update that came out this week. So, I logged in this week and had that update. So, and it looks like PlayStation 5 Pro is still available at major retailers. It's in stock at Best Buy. But I think you're right. Like the fact that it's sold out within the store shows some increased uptick in demand.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we're finally hitting this point in the timeline. I've been reflecting about PS5 Pro versus PS4 Pro, and I distinctly remember when the PS4 Pro came out, and I sat on it. I just watched it for a year. I was like, I'm not getting in the pool until I see and hear that there's some tangible reasons to get it. And I think that tripwire for me was Dishonored 2, because I want to say I was listening to Podcast Beyond. I think that was the show I was listening to, and and I think this was after Greg Miller had left, and Colin. I think it was an episode where they were talking about they had actually tested the differences between Dishonored 2 on a base PlayStation 4 versus a PlayStation 4 Pro. And they were talking about the differences, and I was like, okay, there we go. I finally, it's a game that I seriously want to play, and I'm hearing that there are justifiable, tangible differences between, how this game plays on the two pieces of hardware. So it's nice that here, particularly at the beginning of 2026, when we have all of this, things are going to get expensive, blah 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 blah. It's nice to hear that we're finally hitting this nadir, right, where there's a title that's providing a justifiable reason, for people to go out and get a PlayStation 5 Pro. I'm interested. I haven't listened to Digital Foundry's tech explainer on this. I'm very interested to know what the internal resolution is on Resident Evil with consoles, and so to get a better feel for just how much of a difference is the PSSR update really making, or is it that the internal resolution on PS5 is already higher than it is on Xbox, and then obviously what it is on the Nintendo Switch. So I'll probably dig around and look that up later on during the week. But yeah, it's nice to be hitting this point in the timeline.
Yeah, especially with the kind of rumors coming the last 2 weeks around potential delays of the next PlayStation, that having a PlayStation 5 Pro that is being utilized is nice for the marketplace. So your next news story, not only is the PlayStation 5 Pro in demand because of Resident Evil, but just the demand for itself of Resident Evil seems to be incredibly high as it's breaking some franchise records. This dead air time is Game Logic finding the news story to
Well,
back that up.
I was going back and forth. I was seeing the chat, and I was like, "Oh, I want to bring some of those up on the screen," but then I got to get the news. I'll get to your comments in the chat here, hopefully, in a little bit. Resident Evil Requiem immediately smashes previous franchise record for player concurrency on Steam. This news story over on WCCF Tech by Alessio Palumbo. Resident Evil Requiem is officially out on PC, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and Nintendo Switch 2, following a great reception from critics. The next crucial test to see if Capcom's latest game in the survival horror franchise is another success as the commercial one. It'll take some time to know for sure, but the very first indicator we have for any game, Steam player concurrency, is already looking good. And look, before I go on to the next paragraph, I think from what we've seen, Dragon's Dogma 2 sold Bonga, and I think from what we've seen already, I think we've got a good sense that this is even doing better than Dragon's Dogma 2. So, needless to say, I expect to see this on the NPD charts and to hear about millions of copies sold here shortly.
Well, I think Real Nate's comment in the chat about it kind of hitting a sweet spot in terms of a release window makes a huge difference, right? It wasn't a whole lot of competition. There's not a lot that people that came out big titles previously in the weeks leading up to it, and so it provides some space. Game Logic and Nate also had a comment on Expedition 33 on the PlayStation 5 Pro. I know you've played Expedition 33 on multiple consoles and platforms. Did you play it on the PlayStation 5 Pro, and how's the performance in terms of what you experienced elsewhere?
I did. I didn't do a complete run, but I don't know, probably over 12 hours, maybe 20 hours into it. I'm not sure. On PS5 Pro, like you said, I have it on like all consoles and on PC. Yeah, I mean it looks fine. I played it on PC with very high-end hardware, so I was kind of like, sure, yes, for a console it looks better. I don't think it exceeded what I saw on a high-end PC. So, but absolutely for people who aren't on PC, yes, absolutely great title and great visual fidelity. And great performance, as far as I can tell, on PC. Yeah, it's in just a few hours, Resident Evil Requiem has already crushed all previous all-time concurrency peaks from Resident Evil games. Right now, it stands at 267,000 players, according to SteamDB, and the figure is likely to rise further throughout this weekend as people have more time to dive into the adventures of Grace and Leon. So yeah, it's doing the numbers on Steam. It's also available. I think it's available on GeForce Now as well.
So. Okay. Yeah, Hero Down Under in the chat. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the release window that Nate brought up, yeah, I mean, Capcom has figured this out, right? So, Resident Evil 7 came out at this time. Resident Evil Village came out at this time. Now we are with Resident Evil 9. And quite frankly, if PlayStation doesn't put out a Horizon Zero Dawn in this time frame, and Nintendo doesn't put out a Legend of Zelda in roughly the same time frame, you pretty much have this locked up. And then I think what further benefits Capcom now is because of the GTA. Right, lots of people would have gotten out of the way of GTA 6 last fall and pushed stuff into Q1 calendar year 26. But I think they didn't do that because of the vacuum left by GTA, and so they put titles out then, which I think left us with, not quite a bathtub. I mean, there's stuff. Look, we have stuff coming out in March. We've got Marathon coming out and other things. So there's stuff, following up, behind. But like, if you're not, February is a difficult window to hit if you're not intentionally targeting that window. I think as far as like the slippage window from you miss holiday, I think the tendency is if you miss holiday, you're probably going to go in March because people are going to spin down. They're going to take breaks. They're going to take time. Then by the time you get everybody back, you probably need a couple months right, to really finish up polish and get ready to publish. So yeah, it's a good time for Capcom.
Nice. Yeah, and Hero, I agree with you in terms of the comment of having the best version of what you already have, whether it's the PlayStation 5 Pro, but again, or it's a high-end graphics card, right? The ability to play it on the best that you have access to is always something beneficial.
Yeah,
So,
my comment wasn't to say that the PS5 Pro was a lesser than I'm just saying, because I had already done like a complete 33-hour run on PC, it was difficult for me to then assess, does this PS5 Pro version like really look good? Because what's in my head is, having played it on a high-end PC.
Sure. No, it was not a criticism of the PlayStation 5 Pro version. It was just a reality of your play experience. Yep. Game Logic, let's hit one more from you before I'll drop a new story or two. And a couple weeks ago, or a couple months ago at this point, we had the age verification kind of controversy and announcement from Discord. And now we've got a California law coming around age verification as well.
Yeah, this one caught my eye because it was kind of weird. Also, this was the first news story that I dropped, and it has been a horrifically slow point of gaming news over the last couple months.
I mean, there's not every week that you can have a long tenured, high profile executive retire right at the end of a news cycle. So, feast and famine.
So this news story over on Tom's Hardware, California introduces age verification law for all operating systems, including Linux and SteamOS. User age verified during OS account setup. So that headline threw me for a loop. California's Digital Age Assurance Act, signed by Governor Gavin Newsom in October 25, requires every operating system provider in California to collect age information from users at account setup and transmit that data to app developers via real-time API, with the law taking effect on January. Okay, I understand this a little bit more now. The law's broad definition of an operating system provider: anyone who develops, licenses, or controls the operating system software on a computer, mobile device, or any other general purpose computing device, pulls in not just Windows, Mac OS, Android, and iOS, but Linux distributions and Valve's Steam OS. According to AB 1043, OS providers must maintain a reasonably consistent real-time application programming interface that categorizes users into 4 age brackets: under 13, 13 to 16, 16 to 18, and 18 to older, and hand that signal to any developer who requests it when their app is downloaded or launched. Okay, take a deep breath and take a time out. I also, when I saw this headline, flipped out. I was like, what? Like, on my operating system, on my like general purpose, multifunction desktop computer, you're going to ask me to verify my age? Like, get out of here. But what's actually going on here, because I've heard this story and I've seen it and I've kind of paid a little bit of it. What's actually going on here is this is not an effort to collect ages for every person on every computing device for like that specific purpose for the operating system. The purpose of this is because the app developers are collecting ages because the store vendors are saying that it's on them to guarantee compliance, like with all laws, right? So they're de-risking themselves and passing that buck. The problem is what that winds up resulting in is that you have a billion app developers who now all have age right information for people. And that's what this bill is actually trying to prevent. What this bill is actually trying to prevent is say, no, timeout. Operating system guys, you guys should own the age verification. And then therefore, it's now a secret that's kept at the operator. It's almost like your fingerprint, right? Apple doesn't give your fingerprint to the app developer because the app developer requires ID verification. Apple does that in a physical enclave on the device, and then it verifies that it's you, and then it tells the app that, yes, you can go ahead and authorize whatever. And this is kind of the same thing. What they're saying is that the operating system needs to hold the person's age as a secret and then tell the app that this person is in this age bucket, so that you don't have a billion app developers running around with everybody's age information. That's actually what it's trying to prevent. I'm not saying it's the right implementation. What I am saying is this is not an effort to proliferate the distribution of PII. It's actually an effort to limit the proliferation of PII. So we'll see how this goes. I guess this is actually signed. So this goes into effect in January of 2027. So
27. Yep.
it'll be interesting to see how they go about it. I would like to see Apple at least do it on iOS, do it in the same way that it does fingerprint. Like, it captures the information, it holds it. Maybe that information can actually be held on the device, so it's not uploaded to the cloud. That would be even better. And then it tells the app, yes, you can do this. No, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what this implementation looks like and how it aligns or how it needs to be differently addressed than some of the European regulations around age verification and things like that as well. Speaking of Europe, let's hit a news story here. Since Tao is not here, I'm going to skip over the Game Freak announcements with the new Pokemon, and I'm going to move to Eurogamer layoffs. So Eurogamer, long long tenured game journalism site has been hit with another round of significant layoffs. A large chunk from the news story here from Video Games Chronicle, large chunk of its editorial staff and its entire 4-person video team were let go, although one person is going to be transferred to IGN. Again, back in 2024, it was formerly owned. It was purchased by the Ziff Davis and IGN, and it could previously being owned by ReedPop. And so that's why you see that transfer of staff and knowledge from to IGN. The network includes Outside Xbox and a couple others within their gamer network sites include GameIndustry.biz, which when the ReedPop sale took place, you saw a lot of editorial staff in GameIndustry.biz being let go. Many of them have been rehired, or many of those positions have been rehired, but not necessarily the staff themselves. Rock Paper Shotgun and VG247 are all part of the same network. Digital Foundry used to be part of that network, and last year kind of purchased their independence, as we were talking about Digital Foundry earlier in the show. So to me, this stands out as one more kind of one of many layoffs that have happened in the video game journalism industry over the last few years. It is again, as someone who has followed video game journalism, and it has been kind of the main source of information for decades, to see kind of the independence and the editorial and news staffs continue to take staffing hits is challenging as an industry, where if the historically, one of the reasons why video game sites existed, post magazines, was that it was a place of independence from a publisher. Even if you say what you will about preview events and trips for game reviews and things like that, there was still some semblance of separation, which is not always the case when you're getting your news directly from the publisher, or you're getting your opinions from YouTubers and others that may or may not have connections that they are disclosing. And so this is why it stood out to me as just another domino in the series of dominoes that have continued to make video game journalism as a struggling situation. And it's not just kind of the shift in where people are getting their news, but also where that ad revenue comes from in terms of those metrics and the reality of, what ad revenue looks like, and the rise of kind of AI bots pulling and scraping and repurposing some of that information as well. So That's why it stood out to me as someone who thinks about this industry and this kind of field. So
Yeah, and you can visibly see it at VG 24/7. So first of all, you can see it within the IGN network too. Very weird thing in the IGN network is like you will see the same authors like posting stories on like multiple sites. Because I think the reality is they don't like literally work for an individual site. They're just a pool.
right, it's just content that's being disseminated in different spots to. Yep.
Yeah. But you can see it at VG 24/7 because there will be like gaps of like days where they don't post like a news article. And then there'll be a news article, and then it'll be like 2 or 3 more days, or you'll see an article run on the 28th, and then the next one before that was like the 23rd. When did VGC? Do you know when and how like VGC went independent? Because I didn't catch that at all.
Video Games Chronicle? No, I don't know. Okay. I no, I'm aware. I wasn't sure that VGC was part of the.
In the article, it says package. They used to be, but now they are 100% independent, and I didn't catch that at all. So yeah, we'll go take a look at that.
Yeah, that's got to be later. It's got to be before, because Digital Foundry made big headlines last year when they went independent. So it's got to be before maybe before the sale even of 2024. So, and I think this follows on the heels of a couple weeks ago, you had the announcement around The Escapist laying off all their editorial staff and staff as well, and leaning more into AI generated content. So just another challenging space.
And don't they cover, like, now they're tilting towards covering like casino gaming?
Yes, because things? the parent company that bought them is it's bailiwick there. So yeah, one of the many that have suffered this fate over time. All right, well, let's move off of our news stories and round up the rest of our games that we've been playing over the course of the past week. We've got a Switch 2 heavy lineup here. So a couple games that we've talked about before, some games that we haven't talked about, and some updates on things as well. So let's start with, as I mentioned before, playing an old Final Fantasy. You are playing an old but new Dragon Quest. So I'm noticing that the agenda has the wrong title, and so does our banner on the bottom. You're not playing Dragon Age 7. You're playing Dragon Quest 7, correct?
Oh,
not BioWare developed Dragon Age. No, it's okay. Too many dragons, right? So Dragon's Dogma, Dragon's Age, Dragon Quest. So yeah, you playing Dragon Quest 7 Reimagined. You had started it a few weeks ago, and still making your way through?
Yeah. So, and having a great time. It took me a little, because I started it as I was on the tail end of Trails Beyond the Horizon. And obviously they're very, very, very different JRPGs. And I commented about how Dragon Age 7 is kind of this like simplified, like smoother landscape, not as complex. And then since I've put Trails down, I struggled momentarily and I went into Dragon Quest 7 with this notion that because I was playing Trails, I was not going to crank up the difficulty on Dragon Quest, and so I had it pretty easy. And then I got a little further into the game, and I said, let me tweak it up a little, and so now I have it baselined at like normal with no caveats, and it's still pretty easy. And today I was like, hold on, because I haven't played Dragon Quest games, I was like, is the Dragon Quest series like notoriously easy? And yes, that appears to be, and I can understand, and then that's why it has a certain popularity with a certain crowd, and you can make it more difficult.
Exactly. And there's late game content and optional bosses that can give you that challenge. And there is like an arena late game content or post game content force more of a challenge, but it's definitely scaled in such a way that normal is on the easy side.
Yeah, and I've run into one of those optional bosses, and even at easy, I wasn't able to clear the optional boss. Um, so I've got it on normal now. I don't feel compelled to tweak it up anymore because I'm like, okay, well then I know as I get into late game content, it's going to get more difficult. I'm playing this. I'm playing Metroid Prime 4, and I'm playing Resident Evil. Just finished Trails. I'm like, I don't know that I need to like make things, hard on myself just because. So we'll just continue playing it. I kind of like it for that aspect. It's not something that I got to spend a ton of time. I mean, it does definitely does have a progression model. It definitely has more of a loot drop kind of aspect to it than I originally thought. And I am starting to now get into a little bit more of an inventory management meta. You eventually add an additional character to your party, so that kind of increases the complexity a little. And so I'm doing a lot of like, buying gear, shifting gear from one character over to the other character. Buying multiple copies of gear. Selling gear back. The other thing, like I said, the shop aspect of the game in this game is way more prevalent than it has been in other JRPGs that I've played, or even just RPGs, or even just action adventure games with RPG elements. A lot of times I'm able to skip the store aspect. There's no, as far as I can tell, there's no crafting meta to this, so I very much appreciate not having to be bothered with that overhead. So it's just a really good thing, game to play to kind of make it more about your strategy, like in setting up your playbook, and then just kind of experiencing the story, and not being overly burdened with puzzles and all and other types of things, and just kind of digging it's a lot like kind of playing a fairy tale and kind of playing like a grim fairy tale type of fantasy game, a little bit like Princess Bride kind of thing. So I appreciate that, and like I said, I'm fine leaving it as it is now, while I try and navigate these other couple of games that I'm playing.
Nice. Yeah, it's a lighthearted narrative, right? There's definitely some depth to it at times, but at the same time, compared to some other things, it's designed to be in that kind of, you know, I don't know, not necessarily younger focused, but it is fairy tale like. I think is a great way, like you said, is a great way to think of it. Yep. So I played Metroid Prime 4 back in December. What made you pick it up now?
I've had it earmarked on my list of things to get back to. I just hadn't had, an open spot on my slate. And so when I look back at, what had been, because I started this last week. So when I look back at like what was available on market, this was before Resident Evil came out. And I looked at like what was available from like the last 90 days. And there wasn't a lot. So, this was one of the top titles, going back within that 90-day window. This is very much a split personality game for me. As a shooter, particularly on a Nintendo platform, it is a very competent shooter. I like the mechanics. I like the variance in the weaponry, that I'm getting to now. I want to say I think I'm about 10 hours into this as well. I've gotten like 2 out of the 5 keys, and I'm in like the third, a significant way into like the third major area, ice. I can't remember the ice belt. My big problem with this game is there's an underlying design pattern of this game that is very much 1980s video game, and it's very much back in the days where we bought physical copies of games and we all went out and bought the Prima guide, and just quite frankly, that was the only way you were going to get through a game. Like there were games that were so complicated that the only way you were going to get through them was to get the Prima guide.
Sure, right. You needed that guide, and whether it was, and I think the way I experienced Metroid Prime 4 is in that same way. I didn't think of it all the way back into the 80s. To me, it feels very much like Prime 1. Right, like late 90s, early 2000s, you were still buying print guides. Like, yes, GameFAQs was there, but whether you were using GameFAQs or you were using a print guide, but you needed a guide to navigate some of that. And it's certainly true here.
Yeah, and it's not just to get like, if it were just to get like secrets, I would be more okay with that. but like there's some weird stuff like when you played it, right? So when you get the bike, but you can't complete the bike certification. Like there is nothing in the video game that leads you to understand that you can't complete bike certification when you get the bike. And so like more than one person, many people online said, I spent an hour like trying to figure out like what I was missing. It was only until I went online and like looked that I realized, you can't complete it. When you go to Flare Pool, there's recommendations for you to go to Flare Pool to like get a certain thing or get one or two things, even though you can't actually enter Flare Pool because you don't have the power up that allows you right to cross that particular area. So there's things like that. There's things where the game is asking you to do this whole like complete a level, complete 80% of a level, leave it, go to another area, come back to the like that. I'm just gonna say that's poor antiquated game design. And Metroid Prime 4 is a good game, but that ask is only compensated for by the fact that we live in a digital age.
Well, and I think like part of what you're describing, that like you can only get to certain things, you need to come back to them, is part of the core kind of Metroidvania, hook. But the challenge that I think Metroid Prime finds in this is oftentimes that Metroidvania exists in an interconnected world, where here you have much more almost like Zelda-like dungeons. You have isolated zones, planets. They're not planets this time, but areas on the planet. And they're not connected. You're not seamlessly flowing back and forth between the two. And so it feels more disconnected because of the geography that they're using.
I feel like in Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, it was more patently obvious to me that there was a thing that I would have to come back to than it is in this game. I feel like in Metroid Prime 4, it almost leads you to believe that you can complete a thing. And it's kind of a bamboozle, right? That you can't.
Right. I think that's one of the reasons why you have some of those non-playable characters giving you those tips throughout of like, hey, you should go back to this, right? I think it's Miles or whatever, but they're characters there that they try to give you some of that guidance, because there's no indication that is the case when you're playing the game.
Yeah, except in Volt Forge, you don't have comms with Miles, right? That's the area you go into and you lose comms with him. So like, and you don't regain them until you come back out into Soul Desert. So I don't know, like it's not a thing that entirely tanks the game, but it is a particularly aggravating nit that is compensated for by like I said, the fact that we're in the digital age, but also to give credit to the game that the game also does a lot of things well. I love being on the bike. I love there's points where the game loosens itself up and becomes more like a normal modern open world game. Like I found a shrine where you gain a significant power up, and that just happened because I was on my, so we talked about Ghost of Yotei, right? And I talked about like you just get on your horse and you just ride across like the Japan and like you find stuff. That's exactly, I was on the bike. I was on Viola. I was crossing the desert. I was just out exploring and I happened to come across a shrine. And then, I went into the shrine and turns out I found like this great thing. And the other thing I'll give it credit for before I turn it over to you to go to the next two games, is enemy variety. Particularly in a age now where I've played a few games that it feels like, and Trails Beyond the Horizon did a really good job of this too. But like so many games I've played have like the enemies are just palette swaps. There's not a ton of variety. I love South of Midnight, but South of Midnight essentially has like 3 enemy types that are all like carbon copies of each other. This game does a really good job of having like a large degree of enemy variation, and so I really appreciate that. To the point where
it does make it feel like it's its own biome, right? That there's a living ecosystem here that these creatures and enemies are part of.
Yeah, and the AI, at least in certain aspects, is in some ways, not always, but in some ways is pretty smart. Unfortunately, I grabbed a clip of it when I was approaching that shrine. I forget what they're called, but something that starts with a G, I think. But I ran into, there are some palette swaps of certain enemies where they have biomutations that make them different. But that's also neat because like when you run into them, some of them will act and attack in like wildly different ways from like the last time you saw them, and there's like a slightly different cut. But at any rate, I ran into one of these things, and it turns out if you fire your missile far enough away from them, they actually, and he batted the missile away. And I was like, oh, okay, we've just leveled up. Like it's a whole new combat game now. So and by that time I had an alternate weapon that behaves in a different way. So I was able to use that. But yeah, I'm having a good time with it. Like I said, some slightly aggravating, irritating, grating things, but but overall I'm having a good time.
Nice. I'm glad. That's good. Speaking of 80s and 90s game design, the game that I've been kind of enjoying over the last 2 weeks is Under the Island. It is basically a top-down Zelda, but set in kind of modern era. It's by Slime King Games. It came out in the middle of February. Slime King Games is a 4-person studio. And this is about a 10-hour game based on the reviews, and it plays just like kind of what you would expect from a Link to the Past type of Zelda dungeon crawler, that you're on an island with your parents. There's some mystery going on. You stumble into it as a teenager and are off on an adventure. And instead of a sword, you've got a hockey stick. You get, different special abilities or different additional weapons. And you're kind of making your way through the overworld screen by screen, like you would do in top-down Zelda. And it's got a lot of charm. Like it's the writing is good. It's not over the top humor. It's kind of a little self-aware, but not self-referential. And also written in such a way like it feels realistic. So it is realistic in terms of like these characters are fleshed out and they've got some depth to them in their kind of family dynamics that are going on in this as they're moving to this island and things like that. The boss battles are different because they're not kind of your Zelda enemy boss battles. They're still big enemies on the screen, but they often take totally different gameplay style aspects. So one is a boss battle where you're basically playing Overcooked and running around, getting different pieces of ingredients or making things and bringing them back, right? Like it's not a simple combat attack, that there's sometimes it's a rhythm game aspect, and so the boss battles bring in a twist on the formula. And yeah, it's just fun. It's very enjoyable. It's not something that is super I'm not spending a lot of mental capacity for it. I'm saving that mental capacity for the Star Trek management sim. But Under the Island is a nice kind of palate cleanser in terms of that. And again, I'm playing it on Switch 2. And one of the reasons I picked it up on Switch 2 is back in January when I picked up Big Hops, the 3D platformer on Switch 2. It was the first time that I played around with the lending out a virtual game card. And so because my sons both have a Switch 2, I picked it up there because it's a game that we can share. And the lending out the virtual game cards is actually really easy, even if Nintendo's instructions to it are like 8 steps more complicated than because it's Nintendo instructions. But it works almost like like Game Share on the DS did back in the day, where you are close to the other, and it's infrared. You're close to the other system that's in your family library or in your family group, and you click to share it, and they accept it, and it downloads and shares. And so we've been able to share digital games back and forth that way over the course of the past few months. And so that's why I picked up Under the Island on Switch 2. The other Switch 2 game I have been playing, which I last week I thought you were going to talk about, because I looked at the agenda and Xenoblade was on the agenda, and then I realized that Tao was talking about the oldest Xenoblade on Switch, right? The game that came out in 2017. So he's talking about it at the same week where Xenoblade Chronicles, the Switch 2 edition, came out, which is a $5 upgrade if you own the original Switch edition, or it's a new edition, a full-on Switch 2 version as well. Solotech, thanks for joining us. Glad to have you here. So Xenoblade Chronicles X is a game that I picked up. It released on Switch back about this time last year, and I played it a little bit on Switch 1, and it was one of the first games that I put into my Switch 2 when I picked up a Switch 2 in June, because at the time of its release, there were, kind of data mine files to show that it had a 60 frames per second, already on there. And I was super disappointed in terms of putting it in the Switch 2 back last year. It ran better than it did on the Switch 2, clearly, but it looked worse. Like, I actually went back and played it. It looked better on the OLED Switch as it did on the Switch 2. And so I have been hoping for some Xenoblade Chronicles updates for the Switch 2, and so was glad to see this for $5. It is, to me, it's worth it. You get a stable 60 frames per second. This is a 2015 game, and so even on the Switch 2, I'm still getting pop-up, like running around the town. There's still pop-up of characters that, as they load in. It's not built from the ground up to suddenly be a Switch 2 version. It is an upscaling, and actually the upscaling of it has been another news story this week of people submitting refunds because of some of the upscaling. Digital Foundry looked at it. It looks like with the upscaling, everything looks and runs well when it's docked, but if you're running it on handheld, some of what they're doing in terms of upscaling and frame generation is really where it comes in. Is the frame generation is creating some stutters or some flickers of shadows and other things out in the big open world, right? Xenoblade is a big kind of open world action RPG, and so it's gotten some criticism in terms of what they're using in terms of frame generation when it's in handheld. Yeah, I mean, I guess I notice it if I'm really looking at it, but at the same time, to me, because this is over a 10-year-old game, I'm not super shocked that it's not a perfect translation to a modern system. I'm pleased with the performance. It looks certainly better. It looks like what I wanted it to look like when I put it in back in June. And so for $5, I'm okay with that, right? Like it gives me a reason to come back to this. It brings over your save. If you have a save on your original Switch, I was able to pick up right where I left off and keep going. So it's not totally redoing anything. It's just giving a nice pass, or at least a better pass than what it was running the Switch 1 version on Switch 2. All right. Game Logic, anything else in terms of games before we turn the corner and wrap up tonight's episode?
No. Everybody's on a full court press because there's lots of stuff coming in the month of March.
Yeah, we get March. March is the last month of the quarter, so we'll get a steady stream of releases coming this week. So this past week, or the last couple of days here, there's been the Marathon Server Slam and Marathons coming out on PC and PlayStation 5 on March 5th. Before that, we have a game that was announced at the Sony State of Play a couple weeks ago, which is the next remaster in the Legacy of Kain franchise. So Legacy of Kain Defiance is being remastered, coming out on Xbox, PC, and PlayStation 5. And then hitting early release at the end of next week is Slay the Spire 2, coming to early release on PC. So I haven't had a chance to participate in the Marathon Server Slam. Is Marathon, I know Tao talked about it last week, that he'll probably pick it up because he's enjoyed the extraction shooter with Arc Raiders. Is Marathon on your pick list for this week, or you're kind of in a wait and see spot?
Anything is possible depending on how well it reviews, and whether or not I finish Metroid Prime 4 or Resident Evil this week. So we'll see. I'll never say never, but I'm not necessarily in the game as a service multiplayer mode right now.
Fair enough,
but,
right? But
yeah,
we've worked together long enough to know that the hype itch, the hype train sometimes gets us as well.
Yeah, and I have plans to. I've figured out what time management is going to look like for games that are not story driven beginning to end, because as I shifted into this mode, I was like, well, I still need to figure out how I'm going to contend with just another major thing we have coming out in March is MLB The Show. And so MLB The Show, FIFA, Madden, I'm not saying that I'm not going to buy those games if they are like the best games available at their release window when I have an available slot in my rotation. So I needed to think through what that was going to look like. And that paradigm will also fit with a multiplayer game. So, I'm not going to say, no or never, but, we'll have to see, what's available.
Fair enough. And as you said, we've got lots coming out in March. So, all right. Well, for everybody that joined us in the chat, Solo Tech, Hero Down Under, Nate, Ghostface Killer, Henry Heck, who else is here? Ramon and Baby Boy. Glad to have you all. Again, we're so glad to have you come through. Appreciate your comments and commentary in the chat. It is part of what makes this show special, at least for me. I really appreciate the back and forth that we can have, and the back and forth that you have with each other as we're rambling on as well. So appreciate the community that is here to join us every week on the Enough to Keep Going. If you are listening to this live, don't be shy. Jump in the chat. We're friendly people. And if you're listening to this after the show, come back and join us. We're glad to have you listening or watching, however you're consuming our conversations and our time with you. We are here every Sunday evening, 8 o'clock Eastern time. So come back. Come on and join us. So for episode 426 for March 1st, this has been the Enough to Keep Going podcast with Game Logic and myself, DBQ Hams. So until next week, play the games you love those you play with, and be kind to yourself. Good night, everybody.